Thank you everybody for joining us. This is Leni Manaa-Hoppenworth, and I'm with Indivisible, Illinois. I'm really glad to join you from Andersonville in Chicago. I'm here with a couple of special guests, including the Democratic Party of Wisconsin grassroots organizer, Heba Mohammad, and Tyler St. Clair from Common Cause, Illinois. And we will also be joined later with Chicago Votes, Alexandria Bertolds. Today is 124 days until our elections. Indivisible, Illinois is part of the Grassroots Network that is working to hold the House, flip the Senate, and fire Donald Trump. We have committed to working for our nominee, and it is Joe Biden. So we're excited to vote for him in November, and we're working very hard at the local levels to get people excited to vote. We're going to talk about later how we can do that in a safe way, how we can have access to the ballot, and how we can secure our vote. I'm really proud right now to introduce Rosemarie Colacino. So Rose and I have been working for the last few years together, first on election security and now on vote by mail. I am just going to pass the mic on to Rose to give us an update. We've been here every week for the last month and a half, and we're going to continue on every Thursday at 7 o'clock to give you updates on what's happening and how you can vote safely, securely, and have access to the ballot, no matter where you are in Illinois and beyond. Thanks, Rose.
Thanks, Leni. Good evening, everybody. Happy that you're all with us tonight. And I am going to tell you that we've been working very hard on vote by mail. We've also been working hard on Wisconsin. And this evening, I will be concentrating my particular remarks on vote by mail, but we look forward to comments from Heba that will fill us in on all the exciting work being done in Wisconsin. So the goal of the Vote by Mail Task Force that we have formed is to have the safest, the most secure election possible in November as well as beyond. We have, I think, what is a very catchy tag phrase, and that's hashtag VirusFreeVoting in Illinois. Look for it. You'll be seeing it a lot, hopefully, up until November. And what we have decided to do is rely on the wealth of information from the election authorities. When I say election authorities, I mean directors of election clerks. We are looking to direction from them now that SB 1863 has been passed and signed into law by Governor Pritzker. We are turning to the experts, and those experts are the election authorities. We speak to them because they tell us what needs to be done to efficiently implement this law. So the first thing that they are telling us to do is, number one, apply for your own vote by mail ballot. And we as a culture, I have to say, I think 10% more or less across the country, we like to go to the polls. But given the pandemic, given the fact that the pandemic most likely will not go away by November, we ask you please to all go ahead and apply for your ballot application as soon as possible. The more so we front end that, the better off we're all going to be, and hopefully we're not going to see those long lines. What we are also asking you to do, and we are going to give you some direction on this, is please, if you are on social media, spread out this information to Twitter, to Facebook, to TikTok, to all the different platforms out there. And the good news is, if those are platforms that you're not familiar with, please let us know. We have provided training, and we have turned novices into experts. So we do hope you take us up on that. So why are we concentrating so much on vote by mail? I think you can just turn on the TV or listen to the radio, and you probably all already know that we have seen horrendously long lines in Wisconsin, in Georgia, in Ohio, and that was for the primary. As you all know, this is going to be a monumentally important general election in November, and we want to take every possible precaution that all voters have the opportunity to vote. And just to give you some information on why we're just so stringent about that, unfortunately, we know that 71 people in Wisconsin that either voted at polling places or served as poll workers did come down with COVID. Also, very sadly, in Illinois on March 17th, we lost a voter who did go to the polls and came down with COVID. Again, none of this is scientifically proven, but there is correlation, and we want to avoid, of course, anything like this ever happening again. So what are we going to do? We are going to promote mail-in ballots as much as possible. We are, via direction from the authorities, we are going to request, if feasible for you, that you do make that request online, because that's most definitely going to save a lot of paperwork for the clerks and the directors of election. Similarly to there not being enough of poll workers in some cases, it's going to be tough to generate all the folks that have to do the backroom work as well. So I want to say I am sometimes asked why Illinois, we're a blue state, but most definitely we did need to expand the vote and mail-in balloting, I should say. And we hope to do that even further with legislation after January, because at January, this legislation that we have expires. Also, I do foresee we've had so much success so far in going forward with vote by mail. I hope that Illinois serves as a model for other states. However, I do want to recognize that as a white woman, it's not always easy for everybody else to vote, as it is perhaps for me. So I want to just pull out a couple of stats for you. If you are poor, Latino, or someone who moves more frequently, you are less likely to vote. Minority voters are more likely to wait longer in line to vote in person, sometimes for hours, like again, we saw in Wisconsin, Georgia, Ohio, Nevada, and I can name a lot of other places. Young people and first-time voters are more likely to have an absentee ballot rejected. That's a whole nother conversation. Poor voters are less likely to have the time off work to vote at all, much less wait in a long line to vote. Voters in big cities, who tend to be younger, poorer, and browner, have coped with more serious election problems than others in voting in person and by mail during our COVID-19 primary season. Again, I think it's going to be much more challenging during the general. And last, not all voters have the luxury of requesting their applications online, nor can they afford the postage necessary to return applications. In a lot of instances, the ballot postage is paid, but not the application. So all things that we need to consider and work with our partners. So there should be no barriers to anyone for voting. We join in partnership, and we have with leaders in the African American community and the Latinx communities to ensure that all voters can vote safely and securely. So what we have put together, and we are going to, thanks to Kelly, we are going to place this in the chat box, but we're starting to develop a more and more robust social media kit. And this is really just the beginning stages of it. We have some phenomenal images for you that we're happy to share. You will see this in the chat box. And I just want to reiterate again and again and again, step one, I do suggest that even if you think you're registered to vote, that you ensure that you are, that you haven't gotten rejected from the polls for some reason. That has happened in Wisconsin. And also, please, if you are not registered to vote, if you have to change your name, if you have moved, please do it sooner than rather than later. Step two is to apply for a vote by mail application in your voting jurisdiction right now. I want to just reinforce that online is preferred, but of course we want to work with all communities to make sure they get their application in. So what I have in the chat is a number of different jurisdictions. I don't have all 108, but I have quite a few of them here for you. And I just want to say, if your jurisdiction is not included in any of these links, you can go to the Illinois State Board of Elections, and you can go through the process through that. I do have the link for that too. So we're trying to consider every way for you to apply for that, that ballot. And also I want to, before introducing our esteemed guests, I want to call out to you that within the chat there are social media posts, and they are, again, we're going to build this, but we have social media posts from Chicago Board of Election, as well as suburban Cook County. We have Twitter posts and Facebook posts. We ask you to blast that out to your networks as widely as possible. We have approximately, I think, correct me, Tyler, if I'm wrong, we have probably about 8 million voters out there. We're hoping to just blow out turnout. So please pass on all of this information and stay tuned as we refine it. November is coming. So I now have the pleasure of turning the mic over to my friend Tyler. And I want to tell you a little bit about Tyler. Tyler is the outreach manager for Common Cause. His primary responsibilities include community outreach and engagement, volunteer recruitment, and the creation of programming to pursue campaign priorities. Tyler has studied and worked on issues pertaining to the administration of elections in the US, as well as abroad, serving as the Election Center Fellow at Auburn University. He also, interestingly, and I want to ask him about this, we haven't talked about this yet, served as the international observer for the 2019 presidential election in Nigeria. I now have the pleasure of turning it over to Tyler. Thanks, Tyler.
Thank you very much, Rose. I'm very excited to be here. So yeah, as Rose said, my name is Tyler St. Clair. I am the outreach manager at Common Cause Illinois. We've had a really great partnership with Indivisible Illinois and working with Rose for the past couple of months on getting as much voter education material out there to voters. And it's been a really great experience to be able to work so closely with our friends at Indivisible Illinois and make sure that we're getting these good resources out to people. So I want to thank you, Rose, and Leni, and everybody else for bringing me on tonight. Now, I believe one of the big issues that we're facing around the election in November is misinformation and disinformation, right? And so what I wanted to come on here tonight to talk about was the idea of voter fraud. As a lot of you have probably seen in the news, there was a recent case in New Jersey where 4 individuals were charged with voter fraud, among other crimes, in their special election in May. So this has obviously led to a rise and increase of chatter around the dangers of voting by mail. It was the first election that the city had ever done exclusively vote by mail. Has led to a drastic increase in the chatter about the risk of voter fraud and the corruption of our elections, right? You've probably seen that from the current administration. You've probably seen it on social media. And you have probably heard that if we are going to vote by mail in November, our elections are not safe. So I would say a couple things here. First, I think it's important to note that we should acknowledge that voter fraud is a risk in elections. Voter fraud does happen, and elections are not immune from this. No sort of election is immune from this. There are always bad actors that are associated with this. But we also need to be able to have the conversation in a realistic way, identifying the issue that we have while taking into account all of the security measures associated with our elections that we've built in by dedicated election administrators who want nothing more than to provide a safe and accessible and secure voting experience for their voters. And with thinking of all of that, taking into account the advice from academics who have done the research that shows that voter fraud is infinitesimally small across the United States. Again, we need to acknowledge that there are cases that occur, but it is infinitesimally small across the United States. As far as New Jersey is concerned, again, it's become a pretty popular talking point over the past couple weeks. I think it was this week that the president had tweeted out a statement about New Jersey being an example of the widespread fraud that is going to occur. So let's talk about New Jersey a little bit, what actually happened. There was a special election in Paterson, New Jersey in May for a host of city council seats. And what ended up happening was the city or the county that Paterson, New Jersey is located in decided that they were going to transition to an all mail-in voting system for their primary elections as well as for the election in November. So they did this. What they ended up seeing was that by the end of it, once they had actually received all their ballots, processed them, and counted them, that they had over 3,000 mail-in ballots that were rejected, which comes to about 19%. Now, this is a wildly high rejection rate. This is not common anywhere in the country, but it happened. And so the question is this fraud? What had happened with the voter fraud cases was that 4 men were charged with voter fraud for a variety of different reasons. For some, they were bundling ballots that that did not belong to them, or that they were not designated to be a bearer for, which means that someone has given you the authority to transport your ballot from point A to point B to be turned in. As well as the United States Postal Service finding bundles of ballots, illegally bundled ballots in some mailboxes, which was then later reported to state authorities. So all of this is to say, there was an issue with the special election in Paterson, New Jersey, but a lot of this shows that the security measures that we've put into place work. The United States Postal Service was able to identify suspicious bundles of ballots and alert state authorities, which then led to the arrests of the 4 men. And signature matching is one of the most commonly used security measures associated with mail-in voting. That is then usually followed up by a signature cure process where election authorities give voters a period of time to come in and rectify the issue with their ballot, right? So again, no one election administrator or voter would ever say that a high rejection rate is good. But if there is a silver lining to be seen here, it's that these are security measures built into the system, and that we were able to stop any actual cases of voter fraud from occurring by working with the Postal Service and the state law enforcement. Outside of Paterson, New Jersey, again, voter fraud is extremely rare in the United States. And there are a few reasons for this, some that I've already touched on, including identity verification, signature verification, voter-specific barcodes on each ballot, ballot tracking, and secure drop boxes. And finally, polling sites as a fail-safe. For example, in Oregon, who has conducted their elections by mail since 2000, they had sent out, as per the study, had sent out more than 100 million ballots and only documented about a dozen cases of proven fraud. That is less than 0.0000001% of all votes cast. Another analysis found by the Brennan Center found that in all states between 2000 and 2012, only 491 cases of absentee ballot fraud had occurred. So whenever, again, we hear these myths of voter fraud, we hear this misinformation and disinformation, it's important to, again, acknowledge the fact that voter fraud is an issue, but it's an issue that election administrators and election officials have taken very seriously for years and years and years. And we've built in so many safeguards into our systems to address these issues and prevent cases of voter fraud from becoming widespread, which we've been very successful in doing so. So again, my closing thought on voter fraud would be, while there are unique cases and there are cases that stand out and are concerning, our elections in the United States are safe and they are secure and they are accessible for everybody. And election officials are working very hard to make sure that November is as safe and secure and accessible as it can be.
Excellent remarks. Thank you so much, Tyler. This is strange because usually we're presenting together. So this is my first opportunity to interrogate you. So if I could ask you some questions. What's the best approach? So let's say the Democratic Party comes to you, Joe Biden campaign comes to you. There's a whole other issue about the campaigns being attacked. What's your suggestion? Do we ignore New Jersey, New Hampshire, and the others? Do we shine a light on it? How do we approach? There's different theories on how to do this, but I'm interested in what your approach would be.
Sure, and thank you for that question. So I'll actually go back to one of the comments I made in the beginning of my piece, which is that I don't think if there is an issue, we should never hide it and sweep it under the rug, right, and ignore it. I think if there are issues within any system, but particularly our election systems, as we talk about in November, it's important to recognize that those are issues and there are threats that we need to address. And that have already had efforts made to address them, right? Voter fraud being one of these things. I think we also need to grapple with the nuances and specific details of each story. No two cases are the same. Paterson, New Jersey, again, while there was a 19% rejection rate of ballots, what a lot of that was the system working as a security measure. Is there room for improvement? Absolutely. And county election officials have already said that they are going to institute a cure process for the November election. But again, talking about these issues, recognizing that they are important issues that we have to address, while also realizing that we have taken plenty of steps to ensure that they're not widespread, that they're not common, and if voter fraud is being perpetrated, that the relevant authorities, whether it be the Postal Service or state law enforcement, are alerted before it can happen, and they can put a stop to it.
Thank you for that, Tyler. Much appreciated. I'm going to switch gears a little bit here, go back to what I was speaking of, the mail-in ballot situation. And we've had numerous conversations about approaches. What is Common Cause's approach? How are you going to go about implementing efficiently this law that I think Governor Pritzker signed May 22nd, but who's counting? And there's a lot of different ways we can strategize on this. Indivisible Illinois has one strategy. I'm sure Just Democracy has one. I'll ask you about that next. But what is Common Cause's approach to make sure that as many voters as possible get that vote by mail application in?
Sure. So that's a great question. And actually, I think this is where advocacy groups like us and like Indivisible Illinois and a host of others are all going to be playing from the same sheet of music from now until the end of the year, right? So there are two major things that I would highlight at Common Cause. One, I think we see our role as being in voter education, right? We, again, I referenced, we've been speaking together for quite a long time now, but working with both partner organizations, right? Working with volunteers and working with election administrators to identify opportunities to get the relevant materials out to voters and to figure out or help voters figure out what their specific situation is. Will they be automatically receiving a mail ballot application? Do they need to request one from their local election authority's website? What website do they need to go to? What are the deadlines that are associated with it? If they want to vote in person, can they do early voting? Do they have to wait until election day? You know, with election day being a state holiday, that introduces a completely new issue into the mix. So again, I think Common Cause, our role is really going to focus on voter education and making sure that voters know as much of the relevant information as possible to make it as easy as possible for them to vote and remove all those barriers, those information barriers, right? The second thing I would highlight is our election protection program. So Common Cause employs an election protection program for primary and general elections each year. And we plan on recruiting a number of volunteers within Chicago with the goal of one or at least a couple for every ward, as well as collar counties and downstate counties. We want this to be an expansive system across the state of Illinois and create what we are calling sort of a virtual poll monitoring program where volunteers can work with us to identify problems before they become catastrophes, right? And can give us the information so that we can then funnel that information to either our friends at the 866 Our Vote hotline. We work very closely with the Chicago Lawyers Committee. So providing that sort of on the ground oversight through early voting and on election day to make sure that we can identify any problems that we're seeing and notify those in positions of authority who need to know what's going on.
Yeah, and I can't amplify and stress enough how important those programs are. And I want to do a shout out to Wisconsin again, as we will shortly segue to Heba. But yes, some of us Indivisibles did have the opportunity to work on the hotline in Wisconsin, and it was not easy work, but very necessary work and incredibly fulfilling. So if anybody out there is interested in signing up for the Illinois program, the Wisconsin program, we also have friends in the great state of Michigan, a voter protection program there. We are most definitely able to hook you up. So my last question, and then I know Heba is patiently waiting to go next, but I do have one more. So I can't tell you, and I already have told you how many times, Tyler, I'll tell folks, organizations that I'm working on vote by mail, and they tell me you really need to work with Common Cause. I know, I already am. That happened probably half dozen times. So glad that fate brought us together. However, when I bring up Just Democracy, most folks aren't familiar with Just Democracy. As my last interrogation question here, would you mind just covering Just Democracy, how it fits in with Common Cause, and what the charter is? And that's also a good segue for another guest that will be joining us soon.
Sure. So Just Democracy is a broad-based coalition of organizations across the state of Illinois. It is a nonpartisan coalition of these organizations that works on a host of good governance and democracy issues, right? There's a little bit of work on ethics and accountability, right? Along with quite a bit of work on election administration issues. For example, the Just Democracy Coalition did quite a bit of work behind automatic voter registration, online voter registration, same-day registration. So they have been involved in this work for quite a while. And I'll just say, we consist of groups ranging from Common Cause Illinois, right, to Chicago Votes, who will be joining us a little bit later, to groups like the Chicago Lawyers Committee. And so we cover a lot of different ground and have a lot of really great people at the table. And so I'm really excited. Every day that I get to work with all of those groups on this really important work has been really great for me, knowing that there are so many dedicated and brilliant minds working on these issues. As far as how Common Cause and Just Democracy fit, again, Just Democracy sort of serves as this umbrella for a lot of these organizations, all working on different aspects of these larger democracy issues. Whenever we were first talking about how we thought that, a bill for November should look, we had organizations, I came at it from an election administration and cost lens, but then we had other steering committee members who came at it from an equity and access lens. And then we had others thinking about, what security measures do we need to have, or how are we thinking about language access? And so we have all these different groups that come at each of these democracy issues from a different direction, but to all build policy that one, makes government more representative for all of us, holds government accountable, but also that makes government equitable. And so again, I am I couldn't speak highly enough of everyone at Just Democracy who works alongside us every day on these issues. Again, just quickly, I know our focus going through the summer and into the fall into November is also voter education and getting the word out to as many people as possible, and hopefully to serve as sort of a convener and a repository for all of these great resources that we think people can use and that people want to get in their communities. So that's a little bit about Just Democracy. Again, I'm very fortunate every day to work with such a group of passionate organizations and individuals on these issues that me and you, of course, find so important to our day-to-day lives.
Thank you so much, Tyler. I look forward to hitting the virtual road with you to present our deck to every Illinoisan in the state, hopefully, that is at least of voting age. So we are now going to turn the tables a little bit. We're going to start talking about Wisconsin. And possibly a lot of you know already that Wisconsin is the key state. And our next guest has been carrying a lot of the weight there. And she is essentially our out-of-state coordinator. So the Illinois folks have been so busy, especially the Indivisibles, I have to say, that Ben Wickler went ahead and thankfully hired Heba. And so I have the pleasure of introducing her now. Her actual title is a tongue twister. It's a Distributed Organizing Director for the Democratic Party of Wisconsin. Heba's past experience includes working at the Arab American Institute as the National Field Coordinator and Field Organizer. Heba was a candidate for the Green Bay City Council, which she tells us was a very enlightening experience. I'm sure it was. She also worked at AmeriCorps, providing support to alleviate and eradicate conditions of poverty. We now welcome the very accomplished Heba Mohammad to take the floor. Over to you, Heba.
Thank you so much, Rose. As always, your introductions are far too kind and generous, so I appreciate that. And thank you to our friends at Indivisible for inviting us to be on the call again today. So let me start off by referencing a conversation that we had last week when I joined you all about our weekend of action. So this last Saturday and Sunday was our first bridge building weekend of action of the summer. And I have to shout all of you out for participating and helping us to make it one of the best weekends of action that we've had to to date. We had so many volunteers calling many voters that we were able to identify Democrats who are among our lists that we didn't previously know about before. And so now we've been able to grow our list of Democratic voters so that we have more people to turn out come November. And that is certainly going to help us win, not only for the presidential candidate, but all the way up and down the ticket as well. So thank you for the folks who participated. Bridge building is what we are doing for the remainder of the summer. And if you're not familiar with it, this is an opportunity for the Wisconsin Democrats to reach out to voters who may be persuadable, maybe we don't know how they intend to vote come November, and to have conversations with them about the issues that they care about, and to find out if they are indeed Democrats and if we can count on their support for Joe Biden and the other Democrats on the ticket. So if this is of interest to you, it's some of my favorite phone banking and really, I think, well adaptable for our out-of-state volunteers as well. I encourage you to join us. Our next weekend of action will be July 25th and 26th. And I believe the 26th is also 100 days until the election. So it'll be a huge weekend for us. I hope that you'll come out and join us. I know that we will be sharing links in the live stream comments for you to sign up if you're interested in participating. The couple of things that I wanted to update the team on today are some court-related rulings that came down recently. So earlier this week, a case about early voting in Wisconsin was finally decided. This case has been waiting on a decision for about 3 years at this point, and it came down without the results that we necessarily hoped for. So the results have turned out to be that early voting in Wisconsin will be limited to the 2 weeks before the election. So with that shortened time frame, we really know that absentee voting is going to be key for us in this upcoming election, and we want to make sure that as many voters as possible are requesting their absentee ballots and using that to vote so that they can vote as safely as possible and don't have to risk their health to do so. So 2 weeks is now the window for early voting, and the other major change that has been implemented now is a 28-day residency requirement in order to vote in Wisconsin. It used to be 10 days. It is now 28 days. So on our end, this just means that we're going to, go harder in terms of educating voters to make sure they know what the requirements are and what their options are as well. So that is one of the cases that we have an update on. The other one is less of an official update or official decision rather, but a scheduling one. So we know that many of our voters in state and also our supporters out of state have been waiting for a decision on the potential voter purge case that is in front of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Due to the way that the schedule is falling, it now sounds like that voter purge case will be heard after November. So in terms of voters having to worry about that now, it's not an immediate question or immediate crisis rather. It is something that we still want to work on and deal with after November, and we will still be having conversations throughout this cycle to make sure people are checking their registration and updating it as necessary. But it is, one less thing I think in the immediate future that we have to think about. So those are two updates. A little, it sort of doesn't even out, but a little bad news, a little good news. No matter what though, we're gonna keep pushing, keep educating voters and making sure that as many people vote as possible so that we can win in November. So those are some of the major updates. And the last thing I'll mention is we are starting to do weekly phone banks on Thursday evenings starting at 6 p.m. I know that is also the scheduled time for our live streams here. So if anyone is interested, I encourage you to help us phone bank for an hour before the live stream, join the live stream, and then we'll continue the following week. And that link also for the first Thursday evening phone bank, which will be next Thursday, July 9th, will also be found in the comments of this live stream. So thank you for the opportunity to share that, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you so much, Heba. That was so informative. Those are a lot of the questions that I get asked, so thanks for educating me and hopefully everybody else out there. So my question is this. I partook, as well as possibly a lot of our audience, in canvassing in Wisconsin. We had quite a crew from Indivisible that made the journey. I think our first one was August of 2019, and we had 40 people, which was unreal. So I'm just so saddened because you had such a incredible program, and you, though, just very agilely were able to pivot and turn over to phone banking. I have to tell you, I prefer canvassing, oddly, to phone banking. I certainly have been on the phones, and a lot of our members have been on the phones. What's your sales pitch to convince people that phone banking is not as intimidating as it sounds? And I do want to share with you too that I have my side job is my other is an Indivisible team that I have, and I sent 2 of our members over to you, and they just couldn't compliment you enough on how you ran the program. So with that, can you just tell us what your sales pitch is to everybody to let them know that phone banking is good?
Sure, yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that feedback, and I'm glad to hear that our volunteers are getting a lot out of the experience, and we're happy to have everyone who's on our team. So at this point, I think the sales pitch is we are 124 days away from the election. We don't know what the future looks like other than to say we as the Wisconsin Democratic Party are prioritizing the health and safety of our staff, our volunteers, and our voters. And for the time being, that means we are not going door to door, and phone banking therefore becomes the most effective way that we can reach voters. This is particularly important to have volunteers as information changes. You might recall for the April primary, so much information was changing that we had to call voters repeatedly to make sure that they had the correct information. We don't necessarily expect that to be the same kind of fire drill situation as April, but you never know. And I think being able to practice the phone banking now will help you prepare for such an occasion should it come about. I'll also add that phone banking can be a little intimidating if you've never done it. We include training at the start of every phone bank. We have the opportunity to do phone bank demonstrations where we can pair you up virtually with someone who will do phone calls and you can listen to them. And I'll also say that if you're nervous, being nervous is totally normal and it shouldn't be an obstacle to completing these phone banks. I get nervous literally every time I do a phone bank, and I've done it hundreds of times at this point, but it's just part of my process, and at this point part of my routine to get ready for a phone bank. So if you want to help in this election, if you really are committed to removing Donald Trump from office, electing Democrats so that our long-term strategy can be implemented, at this point in time in Wisconsin, phone banking is going to be the most effective tool that we have, and we would love to have your help with that.
Thank you so much, Heba. And I now turn it over to Leni.
Thank you, Rose. That was amazing. Thank you, Heba, for joining us, and also Tyler. We look forward to seeing you again and again and again to talk about how we can get people excited to vote in this election and every other election after that. I'm really excited to talk about elections now, even though there are 124 days before the election. Some might say that's way too early to talk about getting out the vote, but in the midst of the pandemic, we must, so that we could talk about how are we going to make a plan to vote so that it's safe, so that our votes are secure, and whoever wants to vote can have access to the ballot in any way they choose. We already talked about voting by mail. We talked about, touched on early voting. We also in Illinois can register to vote and vote same-day voting. So please, everyone, talk to people that you know that elections are only 124 days to go. And also, if you think about it, we have 4 full months left before Election Day. Really, if we can get our friends, ourselves and our friends, to commit to doing 2 shifts of phone banking, 2 hours each, that would be a humongous help. More hands make light work, and that's really what Grassroots is all about. It's bringing in more people, and we would love you, and we would love your friends and family to join us. So thank you for Heba for joining us, and for Tyler and for Rose for keeping us on beat, that we need more people to join us with Indivisible Illinois, and also the many groups that are working to protect our democracy right now. I'm really excited to have my kids, they are 19, 16, and 15, interested in these elections. I'm excited that they are coming out with me and protesting on the streets to demand justice for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and countless others. This is a moment that cannot be ignored. We are seeing nonprofits fall around our feet daily because it is a moment of reckoning. In our own neighborhood in Andersonville, where I live, we are calling for businesses to stand up and say that Black Lives Matter, and we will not tolerate the hate graffiti that has happened in our neighborhood just last week. And I think more and more people are beginning to really lean on that sign that we've been holding up for the last couple of years since the Women's March, saying that white silence is compliance. I'm really excited to have Alexandria come and talk to us today from Chicago Vote, because for me, Alexandria represents that section of our democracy that is really engaged right now. Young folks who want to make a difference. I see schools right now stepping up and saying that Black Lives Matter and sharing stories. So I'm really excited to hear from Alexandria. Alex is a recent graduate of DePaul University with a bachelor's in peace, justice, and conflict studies. She's an active organizer in voting rights and the criminal justice system. Alex has previous experience at the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, in addition to the Inside Out program at legislative think tank at Stateville Prison. After Chicago Votes passed the Reentering Civic Education Act, Alex spearheaded the civics curriculum development for every person leaving Illinois prisons. She also serves on Parole Illinois board. In 2019, Alex brought community members together to form Cannabis Equality Illinois, a cannabis coalition ensuring community members together to form coalition ensuring community members are included with the implementation of the legalization of cannabis. She's also ensured our Parade to the Polls program continues to be innovative, as she led our first ever 2019 candidate mayoral forum, bringing 13 high schools together at Malcolm X College to hear from the mayoral candidates and then lead the students directly to the polls. So we are very excited to hear from Alexandria today. I would love to pass it to you, Alexandria, because I know that you have many hats that you wear. I would love to hear what is most exciting to you right now. You have Chicago Votes, you have Just Democracy, the coalition, you have Parole Illinois. What's really getting you excited today?
Hi, everybody, and thank you for having me. Again, my name is Alex Boutros. I am a community organizer with Chicago Votes. I'll give a little bit of background first. Chicago Votes is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works to empower young people to be at the decision-making tables, especially around issues that will inevitably impact us. And so we should be a part of those decisions, whether it's voting, creating laws, implementing laws. And so right now, something that I'm very, very excited about is all of our work. We have 3 programs. We have Unlock Civics, which is the intersection of voting rights and the criminal legal system. We have our Give a Shit program, which is our cultural organizing and engagement with artists, because art is an essential aspect of movement work. And then our Parade to the Polls program, which is our partnership with Chicago Public Schools and colleges and citywide events that make voting really fun and a celebration. And something that I'm really excited about is that all of our work is really, the ethos is leadership development. Everything that we do is with an intention of developing leaders, and so they can lead this work, because our work must be led and informed by young people to be really what we should be doing. And so our premier leadership development program is our Democracy Corps Fellowship program. And so we just hired 12 young people who start on Monday to help us facilitate our Get Out the Vote plan. And so it's the first time I've ever managed anybody. And so I hope I know what I'm doing. It's, anxiety, but also mostly excitement, because just through all of our interview process with all of these young people we had 55 people apply to this program. And we ended up hiring 12. I think the original goal was 3. But through interviews, we were like, these young people are just so amazing and so dedicated. And so our executive director really made it happen. And we held fundraising phone banks where we just had volunteers come and help us fundraise so we could hire more young people. And so that's definitely what I'm most excited about.
That's awesome. I would love to hear a little bit about your ideas on leadership, a little bit more about how is it that folks who are in your new program should look at networking with others. How is it that we can grow what we're doing now in allyship?
So part of the leadership development program is a robust curriculum that they have. And so they actually have trainings every Monday and Friday. Some of them will be open to the public. And so Chicago Votes will have a public training schedule that anyone can join. But the majority of the trainings will just be internal for our young people. And so we're really excited about that. So we can literally just be directly bringing all of these different stakeholders and people that we've worked with to our fellows to learn directly from them on different issues. We break it down to first learning about civics 101, so voting 101, government 101, and then we go to issue campaigns versus candidate campaigns, just to make it very clear what kind of campaign that we're running, and what does a nonpartisan campaign look like. And then we go to case studies, and so looking at specific movement, like issue movements, like the LGBTQ movement, labor movement, to give them a robust curriculum. The training is already set in stone, but I think in terms of networking, if there's events that you want to send me or people want to share, and we can share them with our fellows, so that they can be plugging in different ways, would be great.
Awesome. That sounds great. I'm excited that you're working with young people to talk about legislation. I know right now, for instance, there is a group called We Will, and I wanted to talk about the HB 4954, Black History Education Expansion. I don't know if you know about it, but I'm excited about the idea that that our legislators are looking into how is it that we are talking about Black history with our kids. So this HB 4954 is going to be, it was introduced again by the board member from We Will. Her name is Malikia Gardner, and she authored an amendment to the House Representative Bill LaShawn Ford's bill to expand Black history education in Illinois. And it makes it so that pre-enslavement and the glory days are added into education starting at the kindergarten level. And this effort wants to stop the miseducation of all children and for Black students to understand their heritage and have the same opportunity as other cultures to learn side by side with their classmates. I would love for you to talk about more on how is it that you are looking at education when you're talking to your new recruits, your new excited recruits about engaging in elections, this one and others moving forward? And how is it that we can tie in history so that we really look at it in the face?
So public education is really the core of our Get Out the Vote plan, like a really robust public education campaign to ensure that young people understand what are the changes to this upcoming election, and we can make a plan to vote with them. There's definitely some exciting changes or some exciting parts of this bill, like that this election is a state holiday, and that election judges can be as young as 16, and that there's no GPA requirement anymore this is for this specific election. And so making sure that when we're giving all of this history and background to our fellows, because all of it is going to go into their story and their narrative. Because ultimately, when you're on the phone with somebody, you have your script, but you also have your story, and that is what will ultimately sway someone that you have on the phone with you. And so that's why that will be definitely very important, but also ensuring that when we talk about education, we're also talking about what does it look like in practice? You know, like if we're passing legislation to teach about pre-enslavement or Black history, but at the same time we're leaving police officers in our schools, it's sending some very mixed messages to our students. And so when we're teaching our Democracy Corps fellows about the history of these movements, they're able to take this and put it directly into their movement work. You know, we're learning about movements and the struggles that they went through, and now we're in a movement right now because young people are the largest electorate in Chicago. We make up over 31% of the electorate, and so young people and the youth turnout has the capacity to change our election this year. And, you know, we're definitely not just talking about the president. We're talking about judicial races. We're talking about different races that really directly impact young people on the day-to-day. And, you know, we should be a part of that decision. And so when you teach history is a story. And narratives are should be used to empower people. And so when I think about teaching Black history, are we teaching about Black power? Are we teaching about Black organizing to get officers out of the school, or to, you know, make sure that our schools are funded equitably, or even listening to our students, you know?
Absolutely. In this time, you know, my kids go to Jones High School, and my daughter is telling me that when they walk to the red line, in pre-pandemic times when they actually took the red line, you know, her classmates are afraid when they walk past police officers. It doesn't matter what color they are, but they are afraid. And she cries when she tells me this, because this is not right. And we know right now that, you know, COVID-19, in the pandemic of COVID-19 and how it has disproportionately impacted Blacks in their communities. And really, that is the result of the government underfunding public health, right? While overfunding the police and militarizing our policing systems. And we talk about how the systemic problems of our, you know, our criminal justice system right now. And some people are very, they throw up their hands in the air and they say, well, this is just too much, it's too hard. We can only do this much right now. And I say, in the wake of George Floyd, you cannot ignore what's going on across the globe. This is a moment that we can take. It's a moment for the history. And what is it, leader, that you're going to do at this time? Not just in the White House, but also at the very local levels. So can you talk a little bit more about how Why is it that we should care about what is happening at the local levels?
Because that's what impacts us the most directly, the most quickly. These are the people that are supposed to be living in our neighborhoods. When you think about aldermen or the mayor, these are the people that are supposed to be literally in our communities. And those are the people that are supposed to understand what's going on in the community and listen to community members. And so, you know, when we tell young people to vote for someone that represents them, oftentimes there's no one running that represents them. And that's when young people need to run. That's when they need to decide, maybe I should be in this office. I'm not sure what your total question was there.
I love it. I mean, I think that's exactly what it is. We have to figure out, we are trying to figure out at Indivisible, how is it that we can get people not only interested in every election, but eventually to be a leader in their communities, to step up, you know, not only at the congressional level, but also at the school board level. How about at the school level? You know, the school board actually decides on whether or not there are cops in the schools. How do you think they get there? You know, they move up, right? Yes, exactly. So just tie it.
They're just brought out of nowhere. And so I think going off of that, when we think about our school board and that Chicago doesn't have an elected school board and we're the only one and we just keep doing it like that. But also the fact that students on a local school council don't vote. Like they don't get a vote, which is inherently problematic. Especially when we think about that decision to leave it up to the local school councils to vote on whether or not they want the school resource officers, not knowing that the student doesn't get a vote. And so we're ignoring students in that way if we do it that way. Also, so many young people, CPS students from Good Kids Med City, Increase the Peace, have already stood up so many times saying that they don't want a police officer in their school, that they want other things, you know, nurses, a counselor, very basic things. And so when we say and we promote local and voting in municipal elections, that's why we went so big for the mayoral election, and we just took a big risk, and we were like, we're gonna throw a mayoral forum and parade to the polls because we want these young people's first time voting in a municipal election to be huge, to be so fun, exciting, something that hopefully they'll never forget, in a space where they had the voice, where they could literally be the one to stand up and ask these candidates a question. Our current mayor did not show up to that. And so that's being very reflected right now in that young people weren't listened to then and they're not being listened to now. And so that's why it's so important, because young people see that, oh, you weren't here. And it's really that empowerment piece of, you know, starting locally, like in your neighborhood, on your block, you can see the issues. Who is responsible for those issues? Let's fix it together. And knowing that we can do that, whereas there's this narrative of why try, no one cares, which is very justified. But that's why Chicago Votes is here, to try to change the narrative into making voting a celebration. It's fun. Let's be loud in these streets, you know? Let's yell Black Lives Matter. Let's yell all of these chants on our way to go vote. And that's also why Chicago Votes is here, is because we purposefully show up to polls, and we will be on the phones mostly this election, making plans to vote with young people so they know that Chicago Votes is a partner and an ally that they can reach out to, knowing that we aren't trying to sway their voting decision in any way. We just want to make sure that they have the right to vote. Too often, we take young people to vote and they're being turned away from the polls. For whatever reason, it's usually not because someone doesn't want them to vote, but it's because of some little miscommunication. And so a young person can be easily, disheartened from that. But that's why we're there, to be like, no, we can do it and persevere. And we can do that locally the best. And that's through our parade to the polls. We focus locally.
I love it. Thank you so much for that update. I want to give you a shout out, and also we're going to share into our Facebook live stream some links so people can find Chicago Votes. I'm going to zoom out here and say thank you to Rose. Thank you for Kelly for helping with us on the admin side. Thank you, Tyler, for joining us today. Thank you, Mitzi from Indivisible Brookfield, for also joining us on Zoom. Thank you, everybody on the Indivisible Illinois Facebook page. Again, we're going to continue to share links into the live stream for Common Cause Illinois and for Chicago Votes. Thank you for everything that you're doing to help us expand the electorate and to get people excited to vote so that we can vote safely, securely, and have access to the ballot in any way that we need to in November. And we hope to see you again on another Virus-Free Voting Illinois update here on Indivisible Illinois. Thank you all and have a great night.